Hello my dear students, in this video we are going to discuss about one of the continent Australia. Students, we will discuss in this video that how the Australia was discovered, who were the indigenous people who live over there, from where they came, and how the European reached to this island. Apart from that, we will also discuss how the economic development took place in this continent. What were the indigenous communities which were living here? So beta, this is Australia. Okay, so the island, the continent was unknown earlier. It was even discovered after America. America, you all know that it was discovered in 1492. While Australia was discovered even 300 years later. Firstly, this continent was seen by one of the Dutch traveler in the year 1606. Means the continent, when the Dutch traveler was traveling through the ocean, he had seen one of the island. So it was first sighted by Dutch traveler when in 1606. Okay. Later on, one of the man called Tasman, he landed on this small island near to Australia. And in the year 1642. Okay. The continent of Australia was firstly sighted in 1666 by a Dutch traveler, and in 1642 one man named Tasman reached to this island near to Australia, and on his name the name is given to this island Tasmania. Okay. The first Britisher who reached to the continent of Australia was Captain Cook. Okay, he reached in the region of Northern Australia, in this region, South Wales region. Okay, so the first Britisher to reach Australia was Captain Cook, and he reached Australia in the year 1770. Okay, and he reached to the region of Southern Australia, which was named as Botany Bay. What was the name? Botany Bay. But later on, it was renamed as New South Wales. Okay, so the earlier name of New South Wales was Botany Bay. Okay. And among the European, who was the first to reach over there? They were the Britishers. When they reached in 1770. And the person who reached over there, the Britishers, Captain Cook was the man who reached over here. Okay, now you understood how the continent was discovered by the Europeans. Students, initially and now also you will see that most of the settlements in Australia are there on the coastal side. Okay, not in the interior of the continent. The reason behind this is that the interior of the continent is the deserted region. That's why the living conditions are not so favorable over here because it is a desert. That's why most of the settlements are there in the coastal side in Australia. Okay. Now we move to the indigenous people. How the indigenous people, were they lived over there from a centuries, or when they reached the continent, all these things we study now. Aborigines began to arrive over 40,000 years ago. Aborigines. Students, aborigine is the term used for the indigenous people of Australia. They were the people who came to the continent of Australia thousands of years back means the earliest one who came over there and they get settled over there and living over there. The earliest race which lived over there in Australia. In simple term, you can say them as the original inhabitant or the indigenous people, aborigines, and they arrived. It is said that it is considered by the historian that they reached to the continent of Australia 40,000 years ago. And how they reached? They reached through this land bridge named New Guinea. There is a land bridge which connects Australia to the region of Indonesia. Student, when you see the world map, in the world map you will see the Asia region, India, then other China and other Asian countries, and there are so many islands over here of the of Indonesian islands, okay, which are said to be the Indonesia. So this is a narrow land bridge which connect Australia to those islands. The name of this land bridge is New Guinea. So it is said that the Aboriginal reached to the continent of Australia 40,000 years ago through this land bridge which is called as New Guinea. But according to the Aboriginals, they had not reached from anywhere in the continent. They were the original inhabitant. They lived, they took birth over here and they were living over here. In native tradition, they did not came from anywhere, but they always been there. They were living over there always. And these Aboriginal people, they call the past time, the past centuries, they had given a very nice term to that. They call it as a dream time. What they call? They call the past centuries the dream time. The time of their dream, means very idealized time for them. And when European reached over there, they can't be, when they came in contact with these Aboriginal people, they can't be able to understand what these people mean by saying dream time. What was the dream time for them? So till the late 18th century, till late 18th century means when the British traveller Captain Cook reached over there in the region on the continent of Australia. Till the late of the 18th century, around 350 to 750 indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities were living over there. And they all spoke different languages. How many communities? 350 to 750 native communities lived in the continent of Australia till the late 18th century. And they all spoke their own languages. And even today in Australia, you can see that 200 languages are spoken over there in this continent. 200 languages. Okay. Now we study about one of the one more Aboriginal community. Actually, it was one of the large indigenous group of the Australian continent, but they were not considered to be Aboriginal. It is the indigenous community, but they were not said to be the Aboriginal. The reason is that they reached to the continent much later than other communities. And second reason, they belong to a different race. Racially, they belong to, they were different. But a race is the, we Indians belong to a Dravidian race. There's Dravidian race. Germans belong to a Aryan race. Various races are there, means race depend on the ancestor. The genes which are there in the human, like we Aryans are, Aryans, yeah. In North Indians are said to be the Aryan race because we are tall, heighted, having a sharp features, fair complexion. All these are the feature. While the South Indian people belong to different race. They belong to a Dravidian race. Student, Dravidian race is characterized by having a short heightedness and having a dark complexion. broad nose. These are the some features which distinguish the races, and these differences are on the basis of their ancestral genes. So they are said to belong to a different race. In a similar way, this community of Australia, Torres Strait Islander is the indigenous community of Australia. But this community, Torres Strait Islander, are not considered to be the Aboriginal because they belong to a different race. And they also came much later than the other Aboriginals. And according to the census of 2005, there were 2.4% of this community living over there. Means the percentage of Torres Strait Islander in the continent of Australia was 2.4% in the year of 2005. So student, till now what we have studied how the continent was first sighted by whom, and who reached over there firstly. And after that we have also studied about the indigenous people, Aboriginal people, how they reached to the continent. They reach, as I told you, through the land bridge named New Guinea, and how many Aboriginal communities living over there, and what is the how many languages were spoken over there. All these things we have discussed. Now we will study what happened when these Aboriginal people came in contact with the European people. As I told you, the first Britishers who reached over there was Captain Cook in the year 1770. So what happened when these Aboriginal people came in contact with these European people? A story of interaction between native and European was similar to America. As it happened in America, you have seen that European goes over there, then they pushed up these Aboriginal people, indigenous people, to some other land for their own motive. In the similar thing happened in Australia also. European people one by one started coming over here and get settled over here and taken over land of the Aboriginal people. So the story of the interaction of the native people with that of the European people was very much similar to that of America. Even though they reached to the region, to the continent of Australia 300 years later than America. But the same thing happened here also. Initially, Europeans considered native people to be very friendly to them. When they reached over there, they were received nicely by the indigenous people. Then they considered them to be very friendly, very nice. But later on, when Captain Cook was killed by the indigenous people of the island of Hawaii. Hawaii is the island belong to US. It is the only island of America, of US. Okay. And where it is there? It is not nowhere there in Australia. It is there. And when you see the world map, here is the Australia. Okay. After this Australia, you will see here is America. Okay. When you see the world map, Australia, then come up here Asia, and when this get turned like this, then here is North America and South America. So Hawaii is the only island of US which is there in Pacific Ocean here somewhere, okay, between Australia and America. So when Captain Cook was traveling through this ocean, Pacific Ocean, then he reached to the island of Hawaii, which is now under US, and he got killed by the indigenous people of the place. And by that incident, the total image of the indigenous people get turned off, means get spoiled. Now the Britishers or other European who considered the indigenous people of Australia to be very friendly, they turned against them. They started thinking them as one of the violent community. even though the incidents of the killing of Captain Cook did not took place in the continent of Australia or the island near to it, nor in New Zealand nor in Tasmania. It took place in Hawaii, which is near to the America. But their thinking changed. And after that, they got the justification for what they were doing with the Aboriginal people. When they ill-treated the Aboriginal people like the slave, then they justify it by this statement that they deserve this thing because they are so much cruel type of the people. They are uncivilized people. This single act used to justify their subsequent act of violence later on. And nearly when these Aboriginal people of Australia came in contact with the European people, nearly 90% of the native people died. Why they died? Because when these European people reached to the continent, they brought with them, they carried with them the germs, many new disease, many germs of the new disease, which were unknown to these Aboriginal people. And their body do not have the immunity against those disease. So because of those germs, one reason is the germs brought by the European people. Second reason was that their land was taken off by the European people because of that. And third reason was the battle which took place because of all these things. So because of all these reasons, nearly 90% of the Aboriginal people died and only 10% people, Aboriginal people left, and whose number also keep on decreasing with the time. Most early European settlers were, now, as I told you, the first Britisher who reached to the island, to Australia, was Captain Cook. And after him, what England started doing, they started deporting their convict. They started deporting their convict to Australia. Convict means, beta, convict means the culprit, the one who committed any kind of the crime. So when that criminal completed his jail terms in England, then after that they were deported to the continent of Australia on the promise that, on the agreement that they will not return back to England. Now when these convict people reached over there, now they started thinking for having their new life, their new lifestyle. Then for this they started exploiting the Aboriginal peoples. So later on, now we will study in this, you know that how the European reached to the continent of Australia, and who were the early European settlers in Australia. They all were the, most of them were the convict one who were deported from England after completing their jail terms. Okay. Now we will study that what were the economic development took place in Australia after the settlement of these Europeans. The economic development took place in Australia. They established, these early European settlers, they established a vast sheep farms over there. They started doing the mining activities because many minerals were also there. They established the vineyards. And fourth thing is that they also started doing the farming of the wheat. They started establishing the wheat farms. So sheep farming, wheat farms, vineyard and mining. And because of all these things, when later on the Australia get the status of a state, get the status of a nation in the year 1911, then it was thought to have the capital also of the new country. Then the name suggested for this new capital in 1911 was wool, wheat, gold. Wool came from here, sheep, okay, wheat and gold from mining. So the name suggested for the new capital was wool, wheat, gold in 1911. But later on the name was changed to Canberra, which is now also the capital of Australia. Canberra is the capital of Australia. So later on the name was decided to be Canberra. But Canberra is a native term. It is the indigenous term which means a meeting place. So the Canberra is now also the capital of Australia. So student, this is all about the history of Australia, how it was discovered, who were the first settlers over there, and how what were the economic activities which were started over there, and how when it became the nation, when it became the state in 1911, how Canberra was made its capital. Thank you.